Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the podcast we love to call We Love Ugly Data, the deep analysis podcast. Along with me this time is Dan. Even though it's Dan this time and not Alan, the format is the same. But if you're new to this, welcome for joining us. You've got a whole 3.5 hours of prior episodes to listen to. But this is the format, and it's the same format for all of them. So once you've learned this once, you never have to hear it again. But we'll still repeat it because, you know, it's the format. Part of the format is saying the format. Just bear with me. So the format is 3 topics, 30 minutes. It's roughly about 10 minutes a topic, but sometimes we get a bit overexcited and chat away and things get compressed. But that's my fault because I'm in charge of the stopwatch. So it's my job to referee this a little bit. But we'll start straight into our first topic. And first topic is Dan. Is generative AI hype or hero for IDP? And we're straight in with compliance by talking about generative AI. So you can have a big tick on our compliance list. So Dan,
right.
Is it a hero? Is it hype?
Yeah,
what is it?
Yeah, let's start off with a quick definition in case we have any listeners that aren't familiar with IDP.
Mm-hmm.
IDP is an acronym for Intelligent Document Processing, which is the software that reads documents and then does data entry, which used to be a sleepy little side place in the enterprise, very sleepy for many years, but has been turbocharged over the past 5 years with machine learning.
So that's really up to real estate prices. In sleepy IDP hollow, real estate prices are booming, and everybody wants to buy a new wants to buy a new house there, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. I talked to one of those buyers last week who's looking to invest in IDP, and the expectations, I can say, are much, much higher than they were 5-6 years ago. Anyway, so yeah, hype or hero? Well, I think I'm going to have to start with the slide that Matt's got up here. Right, so there's a lot of words on this slide, and I want to give a shout out to friends over at Kofax. This slide came from a Kofax presentation, and I thought it was apt because what the folks have done there is they've taken some time to figure out what real use cases in business, in an office environment, might generative AI be useful for in an IDP platform, right?
So all of these things on screen isn't just IDP. This is a sort of a macro set of some of which may be IDP and some of which may not be, right?
Yeah. So Kofax is an IDP company, but they also do process automation. So you can think of them as hyper automation, but they come from a document background, so capturing information off documents and then using that for processes is what Kofax does. So this isn't too far off the mark from where most of the IDP companies that we're talking to, Matt, are seeing use cases. But yeah, several here. We're not going to go through each one of them, but the point of this slide was to say there's some really good thinking going on now in the IDP community, as not just as vendors try this stuff out inside, but in the case of Kofax and some others we talked to, they've had some user meetings and talked to some of their largest customers and invited them to test things in the sandbox. I think Kofax, like a lot of them, are using Azure OpenAI from Microsoft. And so that's a safe environment for a lot of enterprise customers to come in and test some of these use cases out.
So the safety would be the fact that they've already got the regulatory compliance for Azure generally, therefore it's a sandbox within a safe environment already.
I think so. And so this is an example. Then what we see here is the creativity, and it's just beginning. I talked to a lot of IDP vendors, of course, and I've interviewed, I don't know, probably getting close to 100 this year. And I would say out of those 190% of them have told me they've got some new functionality or feature that is going to be driven by generative AI. Some of them have already released those features. Let me give you a quick, well, first let's go to the next slide. And in our next slide, the point of this is another one from our friends at Kofax. And the reason why I put this up was Kofax is the largest company by revenue in this space and has been for years. And they took their time to come out with what their plan was, what their roadmap was. They waited a long time when everybody else, all their competitors, were out there hyping new features. And everybody in the industry was sort of waiting to see what the elephant in the room was going to say when it finally spoke. But this particular slide, we don't have time to get into details, but I'll sum it up for you. This is incredibly important for the process of document understanding. There are 3 functionalities that the Kofax people have outlined here that are critical to the process. The first one is determine what data you want to extract. And what they did was they did a before and after state. So you see the today's state and the future state. Yeah. And this slide is it's hard to overestimate how radical this is. Because basically what Kofax is admitting here is today's state, which uses a lot of decent discriminative machine learning models, it still takes a lot of work to prepare one model for one document type.
So today's state, basically, you have to know what it is you want to extract before you can extract it.
Yeah. And you have to do things like regular expressions, voting methods, fuzzy matching, and Kofax has listed all these technologies that have to be done in order for a system to process and automate documents and just one type of document. And then when you go to the next type, so you got an invoice, right? You go to a purchase order, that's a different document type. Then you go to a contract. Well, wow, that's unstructured, right? That takes a completely different set of models. The future state is, as you can see, is using generative AI to train the system is basically, well, it's one and done in a lot of cases. It automatically generates lists instead of you having to do that. I've tested some of these myself online, and it really is a wow moment for people that are used to doing it the hard way, right? And before we leave this section, I want to talk about just very quickly about a couple other vendors who have shown us their use cases. The first one is Instabase. Instabase brought out AI Hub back in June, and they now have, I think, about 35 sort of out of the box. You go to the website, and if you're doing a driver's license, they've got a process flow thing you can set up, and it doesn't need to be trained. It's zero shot. In other words, it understands, oh, that's a driver's license from many different countries, and I should get the name, I should get the expiry date, I should take the picture, I should look for signature, etc. That's just one example. They have all these models up there. It's using Gen AI, and it's pretty cool. Other people of note, Hyperscience has done some work recently to basically do text extraction without OCR. That's pretty cool stuff, but they're making some headway with that. We might see that shipping in 2024.
So to round up the kind of future state, we're going from the today's state where you have to know what you want to extract, with the future state going, hey, here's some stuff I think we should extract. Almost is that zero shot. I've not seen it before. Here's a bunch of fields that I think you could extract. Do you want to extract them? And if I've seen it before and you've given me some confirmatory idea that data format, let's say a date of birth, is something I know is something you generally will want, I can then, with a greater degree of confidence, make that suggestion. Absolutely.
Generative AI, properly deployed, is very, very good at something called named entity recognition, NER, which is, a date, right, is a named entity. An address is a named entity, and so on and so forth. You can think of different things within your document that you might want to take out and do some data entry into another system or pass it on to another system. It's very, very good. And this was a side effect, because I don't believe that OpenAI or any of the other LLM guys were thinking this is what we're doing this for. No. They were doing it to do generative AI that everybody's really in love with now. Write my resume, ChatGPT. No, this was like a side effect. It can read a document. That's what is happening here. And that's what IDP has been about for 50 years, trying to read documents using a machine. So it's not the hero, though. It's somewhere between hype and hero. It's going to be a very, very useful part of every IDP platform and every IDP stack that you see over the next year. And I think in another year or so, it's going to be anyone who doesn't use generative AI as part of their IDP is going to be looked at as sort of like the second wave of IDP we talked about a couple months ago.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, they're sort of in the past and it works okay, but I really like to use some of that functionality that I've seen from generative AI. So yeah, someplace in between, not ready to declare it hero, but it certainly isn't pure hype. That's my conclusion.
And I think this is a slight call forward to what we're going to talk of next. What we are seeing here is something which can have demonstrable business value straight away, right? It taps into an existing thing, which is an existing piece of technology that we knew had a role. Secondarily, it taps into business processes where we understand the cost of resolution. And therefore, that time from introduction to understanding how much does it decrease time, increase quality, reduce errors, and let's say those are the three big ones there, is much easier to understand. That calculation is much easier. So as you said, it may not be the most exciting, flashy, zeitgeisty use case for Gen AI, but it may be the one that makes Gen AI actually pay for its own lunch before others, maybe. Okay,
agreed.
Cool. So on to the sort of second one, and I think there are elements in here which are kind of related, which is we were just talking before we hit record properly about the fact that in our respective places in the extreme west and the extreme east of the UK, it's starting to get a little bit chilly. Certainly last week was the first week of the after the summer that my heating kicked in, and like a lot of people in the UK, I have a smart meter. And what a good thing about a smart meter is it gives you very accurate billing. Two, it shows you in real time your money going away. So I'm very conscious in my mind a little bit about kind of metering. But something we haven't done very much in the past, for good reasons, is actually to call out things that we see from people who might actually be considered to be our competition and say, that's kind of dumb. And one, because it's not necessarily that cool. But I'm going to make an exception here a little bit because I think it helps prefaces kind of the discussion here. So Forrester, huge analyst company, so large they probably don't even know we exist in the case. But the things that they say do attract a fair amount of attention. And as we both know, if you want to get an injudicious statement from any organization, listen to the CEO. They are the people most likely to say something injudicious that might get a CMO a slap on the wrist or a product manager removed from their role, but a CEO can say things. So Forrester CEO at their recent Technology Innovation North America event in Austin said it was time for businesses to adopt a clear generative AI strategy. This is from an article in September from Information Week. And I quote, "We've rarely ever told our clients you should move forward with the technology. We typically tell our clients, let's wait and let the vendor environment rationalize. Let's let other companies make some mistakes. Let's watch this technology as it develops. But I tell you, in the case of generative artificial intelligence, we are not giving this advice. We are saying you must do this now." And if you think, well, what does he mean by now? George continues, not next month, not next quarter, definitely not next year. You must begin to understand and envision, and this is already when you're starting to row back here again. You must begin to understand and envision how you're going to use generative AI within your company to win and retain customers. You must embrace, engage with this technology now. So you must do this now, but now might be just be thinking about it. And that's kind of indicative of a little bit of where we've got to, in 2023, where we're just beginning to get back to the point now where there's a little bit of oxygen back. We can all take some deep breaths because we're all getting a little bit lightheaded from the lack of quality air. So let's sit back and think, what have we learned from this first year of generative AI being at the top of everybody's agenda? One, it hasn't left a lot of space to talk for other things. But the reason why it's in my mind, and big plug time on our podcast talking about our research, we've recently just published a report called Workplace AI Market Analysis, Generative AI in the Desktop Revolution or Evolution, depending how you read the title, which is specifically about generative AI tools on the workforce's desktop. And I'm talking about things like Microsoft Copilot here and it's kind of again. So I'm seeing this kind of comment coming in from George Connolly about you must do this now, you cannot wait. Don't pause to think about whether it's a good idea. Don't pause to think about whether it makes sense for your organization. Do it or you'll get left behind, at the same time as I'm writing something which is saying, hey, this is probably already functionally an evolution for the desktop rather than from the revolution, which just takes us back a little bit about billing. On screen, for those of you who are listening to this, is actually a photograph of my smart meter from I think Wednesday or Thursday last week at 9 in the morning, and I'd already used over £2 worth of gas. Most heating in the UK, just if you're outside the UK, is still run by natural gas rather than anything else. So we have a kind of a meter.
Except in Cornwall.
Except in Cornwall. So you're on oil in Cornwall, or are you fully electric?
We are, I don't know if I want to out myself here. Yeah, we're still on heating oil. I live in a 200-year-old cottage with stone walls 2 feet thick, and we're not going to have a heat pump for a while.
Yeah.
Be nice, but not yet.
I've recently just invested in solar for my south-facing roof. So that's why on the photograph here, my gas is over £2, but my electricity is not very much by comparison, because I'm generating exactly this podcast. At least my end of this podcast powered by solar, the other end powered by oil. You couldn't get a bigger contrast of these two locations. But the reason why I was thinking about meters is that, you know, we believe, or certainly I believe, that the future for Gen I for these desktop applications is actually going to be a meter, a metered kind of thing. A little bit as we've seen for API use, is that over time, we're going to have to actually, every time we hit our generative AI models, we're going to have to be paying a few cents, or more likely buying lumps of credits to say you've got, 100,000, 200,000, 1 million individual queries, because that's kind of the only way these things will more or less add up. I published a piece about it last week, but again, it was a callback to something that was in the Wall Street Journal that you and I discussed in our sort of workplace forum, Dan, which was that Wall Street Journal saying, well, the early stuff that Microsoft have been doing around Copilot is unsurprisingly a loss leader. So the stuff they did for GitHub was being charged at $10 a month, but it was costing probably 20 to 30, in some cases up to $80 to service those individual customers. And you know what? As you pointed out to me, this is no great surprise, right? Microsoft One can wear it. This is a good way of proving it. And sometimes software, and we haven't got time to get into the whole vagaries of how software is actually priced in an environment where, software, huge margins. You can kind of charge what you want for it, and it's deciding really what the market will wear. It's worth calling out a little bit here that on top of that, if we start to think, well, from a software vendor point of view, the price isn't important. For customers, it is. And the example I gave here was a company which I decided to size at around 1,000 seats, because it helps me actually work out the figure in my head. But if you're a company of 1,000 Microsoft 365 users, and you decide that you all want to have Copilot, and that costs you at the moment a potentially loss-leading figure of $30 per user per month. Well, over 3 years, that's a cool $1 million before you've thought about, you've done the George Connolly, you've gone, I'm going to do it. I can't worry about the element of it, how I'm going to recover the cost. You spend $1 million. So thinking a little about what we were talking about IDP a few minutes ago, which is, you know what? This is doing something established already as having value and doing it better, faster, cheaper, more accurately, less errors. So, hey.
Yeah, and Matt, also in the IDP world, people are used to paying per page or per document. That's always been so the meter's always been the thing, right?
Yeah.
Especially since cloud-based stuff. What I thought was interesting too was when you showed me that Microsoft was pricing it per seat.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a volume-based model unless there's another, because if you pay $10 a year for your seat, and then you're the super user in your company who's, using like 1,000 tokens an hour or something, well, wouldn't that add up for somebody? Because unless Microsoft has a really good deal, block deal or something with OpenAI, which maybe they do, but everybody else is talking about meter-based pricing for Gen AI, for LLMs, except Microsoft with their per-seat license. How does that work, right?
Well,
I don't get it. Yeah.
Well, and to be fair, on the kind of the desktop AI thing, Google is very much doing exactly the same as Microsoft and charging per seat and also charging around $30. Salesforce is doing more or less the same. So they're all kind of falling into line at this pace. It's not the only piece of advice in the aforementioned report that you can buy right now. You go with your credit card from our website. It's one of those things about understanding the process and actually understanding what you were saying about what is the super user doing and how many times will they need to ping it during a process. What the value of that? If they hit it 10 times, but 10 times actually still means that process is faster, better, cheaper, that's cool. If it means actually anything over 2 or 3 times, then all of a sudden the process is more expensive. The point is, if you don't know that process and haven't done those calculations, it's very difficult to understand whether our aforementioned cool $1 million over 3 years is a good idea, a brilliant idea, a revolutionary idea, or an idea that's going to get you fired. And I would think, as a head of a line of business, you would want to know that.
Well, one thing's for certain, there are some large companies who can afford this. Did you see Amazon just bought $1 billion worth of Microsoft 365 licenses?
Yep. Yeah.
So, it's all relative, I suppose, when you have a workforce of whatever they have, 1 million people, right? They can have seats on that. Boy, this is actually a topic that deserves more time than 10 minutes, because wouldn't it be great if Microsoft was in charge of the energy prices in the UK and we could all pay $30 a month, flat fee?
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how much or how little, everybody pays the same. It's democratic.
Well, I think, again, I think if it was saying, hey, if electricity was new and we were trying to convince people that electricity was going to be beneficial to their lives, maybe we would be pricing it that. Sadly, we're in an environment now where it is absolutely vital. We're not having to convince anybody they need to invest in it. We're not trying to say, hey, you need to do this over the steam engine that you previously got running in the hall of your house, right? We're kind of like bought into this. And we only have one hookup. Our hookup is to the grid, and we have to kind of pay what the grid decide they want to charge us. So that horse not only is bolted, but it's gone and had many falls by now. But I think it's an interesting point. It's what you're saying here.
With all the power, with all the electric power that's going to have to be generated to run the data centers to basically serve up all of this Gen AI power.
Yes.
Will probably be Microsoft will probably be an electric utility in the near future with nuclear electric plants all over the world. But that's for another podcast.
Probably hydroelectric with all the water involving in the cooling. We're in the dangerous world of getting into a data center discussion that neither you or I are prepared or equipped intellectually to have. But except there are all sorts of other factors that we're not covering here, which happen at an infrastructure level, which is kind of a little bit beyond us. Let's talk about something that we do know a little bit more about, which is being underestimated because we're in the EU. So Dan, why do people continue to underestimate the innovative power of the EU? Oh, but bear in mind, the web came from the EU as an example. Yeah. Why do people underestimate the EU?
This is sort of a follow-on to the one you and I did, I think it was back in May, when you talked about, hey, look at what's happening in the EU. Look at the investment going into software companies there, and people are noticing it. I have conversations with people from all over the world, and I'm working on this year's IDP report, working this month and hopefully publish it soon. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm breaking down a distribution of IDP startups by region.
Oh, cool.
And this is fun. And one of the things that I realized is because, sort of the accepted wisdom is, where do you look first? Okay, Silicon Valley, London, right? And then after that, where would you look, for where's all this stuff coming from? So generally speaking, we look to, New York City, because there's a lot of AI companies in New. So you tend to look in those places, right?
Yeah.
But, there's India. Let's not forget, India has really been for years a hotbed of AI machine learning. But Europe doesn't really get its credit. And as I started to count up the number of startups in the IDP space alone that are using AI over the last 7 to 10 years, it's a big number. Yeah. And when I talk to them, they're doing some really cool, innovative things. And what it boils down to is a lot of them are selling globally, but they're really good at their regional specialties. Like I talked to a company in Poland. They have a product that could be global, but they're really, really good at, I think it's debt collection in the Polish system. And they've nailed it, right, with their product. And I talked to somebody from Switzerland. And guess what they're very, very good at? right? Either banking or insurance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Two, right? They're very good at both of those. And this is one of the things that you realize is that within Europe, Paris is another one that we need to call out. Berlin, certainly. There's a lot of really, really smart AI people coming out of uni. That's number one. Number two, the cost of entry to build a product these days using AI has dropped so much.
Yeah, and that's something we did talk about last time. The pre-transformer and the post-transformer costs are non-comparable.
Yeah, and there's also government support that's available. I've worked with companies in places like the Netherlands that get a really nice sort of tech grant for the number of people that they hire in their company, and it's that kind of support, I think, that you see in some of the EU countries that really allows these companies to incubate and to grow. And the other thing too, and I'll kind of close my opening thoughts with this, in terms of the hype, right?
Yeah.
So anybody out of New York started the hype's up here, okay?
Of course.
Like, because it's New York. And then if it's Silicon Valley, it's pretty close.
Yes.
If it's London, it's a whole different, it's an understated, we're English and we're really smart because we have Cambridge and we really know what's going on in machine learning, UCL, right? I mean, there's some really brilliant people in the UK when it comes to data science. There's no question about it. And they know it. And you sort of get that feeling when you're talking to a startup here that they're not hyping, but they're just sort of exuding this, we really know what we're doing. It's like the imitation game, sort of genius people, and then you get to the Europeans and they don't boast. They're not like, it's funny in a way, they're not like hype artists. They sort of go about their business and they build these things and they're delivering business value. I've talked to some of their customers and it just gets done. And I think that's one of the things about the EU that really impressed me is I'm tracking probably about 35 companies now just in the EU that are doing something that's interesting.
I think one of the things, I mean, from kind of a broader, something I spent a number of years around NLP, and you tended to find that NLP had its, particular natural language processing. Sorry for those people unfamiliar with that particular acronym. Tended to find its home in places where multilingual business was the norm. So, a company I worked for was based in Quebec. It's a perfect example of a broadly bilingual area. An awful lot of it came out of Benelux again, and certainly around with Belgium, which again is a legally bilingual nation, much like it is in Canada. So the idea of needing to be able to do have language smarts that allow business to happen, particularly when you've, like me, have traveled across Europe and it's relatively small. That's supposed from kind of Calais through to Frankfurt, you can drive it in a few hours. It means you've got a lot of semi-permeable business environments that need document exchange, need language exchange, need legal exchange. So all of the ways of being able to do requirements around translation, localization, having to deal with multiple language environments, multiple legal environments within a relatively small population and a more geographic area has just kind of been the norm. So it's kind of, to use an American term, it's table stakes, which I now realize is a gambling thing, but it's table stakes to have to be able to do that, because if your home market of the Netherlands isn't big enough to sustain your growth plans, you're going to have to be able to operate in Germany, Belgium, France, Switzerland, and Italy very rapidly, or you're just not going to have the growth space.
And that is what a lot of these startups, I mean, they have brilliant technicians, scientists, data scientists, machine learning engineers. But now a lot of them are getting to that stage, Matt, that 4 or 5 years into their startup where they've nailed part of their home country, right? And now they've got to start to expand outside their borders. And even within the EU, there's still some challenges. There's still slight differences across borders, even with all the standardization, homogenization over the last 20 years. There's still enough of this sort of specialty, right? And some of it is just down to language, just pure and simple. Anyway, there's a lot happening in the EU, and you and I are close to it, so we have the benefit of being able to track it in real time.
Yeah, and I guess you know, you're probably the go-to person here, you know, not just with deep analysis, but also, you know, in the big world beyond it, who is tracking. I don't know how many vendors are you tracking now for this year's market analysis?
We're up to 354, 355 because I just got a new one today.
Well, there you go. So I don't think there's anybody tracking that number, but certainly having that breakout, you know, for this version, which has breakout by country and breakout by region, I think is going to be very interesting for those people who want to have that in a spreadsheet, which I know the people who you talk to regularly, but just in general, just to understand where are the centers of excellence across, and when we know where is attracting funding, when also who's actually generating some money from this, and having already christened this as being the money maker for Gen AI, the unlikely money maker for Gen I. Understanding the machinations of how that is, it's going to make this pretty valuable research, Dan, I reckon.
I agree. And I guess in closing from my side, it really reinforces a narrative that we've been talking about for quite a while, which is IDP is not a global. There's no global platform for IDP that exists. Okay. It's very local, it's very regional, because documents are very local and very regional, and the variability is incredibly diverse. And so it makes sense that there should probably be an IDP specialist software company in every business center in the world.
Well, there you go. And on on that, I think very sound biteable quote, I suggest that you extract that one and stick that at the top of your next blog post, Dan. We're going to leave it for today. We've actually overshot by about 30 seconds. So that's me being less strict on timekeeping because you were saying interesting things. I didn't want to cut you off, Dan. So
that same to you. Hey, who cares?
Well,
nobody's paying by the minute here, are they?
Well, no, I was paying by the minute. And I actually, you know, we're using a certain amount of solar and a certain amount of oil to do this. So let's call a halt of it now before we use too much of either of those. So thank you for joining us for this episode of the podcast. Just as next time, 3 more topics, 30 minutes to discuss them. And we will see you then. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.